The air on Xylos didn't have the decency to be breathable. It had to be earned. Each lungful was a metallic, recycled ghost of oxygen, scraped from the industrial smog by the rebreather mask clamped tight across Anya Petrova's face. Below her, the Forge world sprawled not as a city, but as a single planet-spanning machine. A monument to a war effort so ancient and vast it had become a form of religion. Rivers of incandescent slag flowed through continent-wide canyons, casting a lurid, orange glow against the perpetual twilight of the soot-choked sky. The only mountains were the spires of ascension, colossal biofoundries that pierced the toxic clouds, their peaks lost in the chemical haze. The rhythmic, planet-shaking thud of their machinations was the world's only heartbeat, a sound so constant it was indistinguishable from silence. This was the heart of the Cygnian ascendancy, the crucible where their biomechanical legions were forged, and Anya was here to rip it out. She shifted her weight on the narrow gantry, the grated metal groaning under her worn mag boots. 100 meters below, a cascade of molten steel poured from a foundry maw, the heat washing over her in a shimmering wave, a stark contrast to the biting, chemical wind. This place was hell, but hell was a concept with which Anya was intimately familiar. She'd been born in the rust belts of Mars, in a dome city where the air was just as manufactured and the only horizon was the corroded metal of another habitat block. She learned to read schematics before she could read novels, learned to bypass a security system with a stripped-down datapad and a prayer. War, for the Cygnians, was a glorious symphony of honor and tradition. For Anya, it had always been a matter of leverage and logistics. Find the critical system, break it, and watch the larger machine tear itself apart. Her partner, Elias Vance, materialized from the shadows beside her, moving with a silence that defied his size. He was a piece of old Earth, a relic of the Unification Wars, a conflict so savage and desperate it was spoken of only in redacted files and the haunted eyes of its few survivors. His face was a roadmap of scar tissue, and his gaze was flat, pragmatic, stripped of all illusion. He didn't carry a weapon. He was a weapon. Scanners show a patrol route 2 levels down. His voice was a low gravel in her earpiece, cutting through the foundry's roar. Prefect-class guard units, choreographed, predictable. Anya didn't need to look at her own datapad to know he was right. The Cygnians moved with the flawless, geometric precision of a program executing its code. Their weakness wasn't in their armor or their weapons, but in their ancient, unyielding belief in order. They could not conceive of a strategy that wasn't born from 1,000 years of tactical doctrine. They couldn't comprehend the chaotic, desperate ingenuity of a species that had spent millennia clawing its way up from the mud, fighting not for glory, but for the right to see the next sunrise. Her mission, handed down from a grim-faced general in a bunker deep beneath Luna, was simple in its sheer audacity: infiltrate the primary forge, reach the central Nexus spire, and upload the logic virus she carried on a shielded data shard. It wasn't a bomb, it was something far more insidious, a poison for the soul of the machine. The mandate called it Operation Midas, a cynical joke for a weapon that turned everything it touched not to gold, but to chaos. If they were caught, they didn't exist. No rescue, no recognition, just 2 more ghosts swallowed by the war. They descended into the guts of the machine, moving through a labyrinth of conduits and maintenance tunnels that were never meant for organic life. The air grew thick with the smell of ozone and superheated lubricants. Massive pistons, each the size of a Terran transport, pounded rhythmically around them, threatening to crush them with a single misstep. This was Vance's element. He navigated the treacherous environment with an instinct born from crawling through the shattered subways of Warsaw in the bombed-out infrastructure of the Beijing arcology. He was the anchor, the brutal physical reality, while Anya was the phantom, her mind already 3 steps ahead, parsing the flow of data through the Forge's systems, looking for a vulnerability. Their first encounter came sooner than expected. Rounding a corner, they found themselves on a maintenance platform overlooking a vast assembly floor. Below, ranks of newly forged Signian hoplites stood in perfect stillness, their metallic carapaces gleaming under the harsh industrial lights. A prefect, its form larger and more ornate than the others, moved down the line, its optical sensors glowing with cold, blue light. It was inspecting the new batch, a master artist surveying his work. A secondary patrol, 4 standard units, was making its way up the ramp directly toward their position. There was no way to retreat without being seen. Vance's hand instinctively went to the pulse rifle magnetized to his back, but Anya put a hand on his arm, her touch feather-light. "No," she whispered into the comm. "Noise is a luxury we don't have. Follow my lead." Her eyes darted around the platform, taking in the details the Signians, in their rigid adherence to protocol, would have ignored. High-pressure steam conduit running along the wall, its joints visibly strained. A heavy, automated maintenance crane poised directly above the patrol's path, currently dormant. A control panel, its casing slightly ajar. To a Signian, it was just industrial scenery. To Anya, it was a palette of opportunity. While Vance positioned himself behind a support pillar, becoming one with the shadows, Anya glided over to the control panel. Her fingers, nimble and sure, slipped a microconnector into the port, her datapad flaring to life. The Signian machine language was complex, elegant, and built on millennia of unwavering logic. It was beautiful, in a way, and like anything beautiful and rigid, it was brittle. She didn't try to hack the crane's primary controls. That would trigger a dozen alarms. Instead, she found a loophole in the diagnostic subroutines, a maintenance command designed to test the integrity of the grapple clamp. It was a simple, forgotten piece of code. She isolated the command, looped it, and attached a new trigger, the proximity sensor that would detect the patrol's advance. As the 4 hoplites marched up the ramp, their movements perfectly synchronized, their footfalls echoing in perfect time, she gave Vance a single, sharp nod. The steam conduit was a more direct problem. She couldn't access its controls from here, but she didn't need to. She unhooked a small, adhesive charge from her belt, no bigger than her thumb. It wasn't an explosive, it was a focused thermal lance, designed to superheat a single point of metal to its failure threshold. She crept along the gantry, silent as a whisper, and slapped it onto the conduit's weakest-looking joint, directly overhanging the ramp. Then she melted back into the shadows next to Vance. The patrol was halfway up the ramp now, their methodical advance unwavering. From his high chamber, Prefect Valerius watched the patrol's progress on his command screen, a minor detail in the grand, humming symphony of the Forge. His mind was on the purity of the new batch, on the flawless execution of the sacred rites of creation. The sudden alert of a minor pressure fluctuation in a steam conduit in Sector Gamma 9 was beneath his notice. An anomaly so trivial it was automatically relegated to a low-priority maintenance queue. He held an unshakable faith in the perfection of the system, a system that had operated without catastrophic failure for 10,000 years. The primitives from the Sol system were a nuisance, their tactics erratic and without honor, like the chittering of insects in the walls of a grand cathedral. An annoyance, but ultimately insignificant. As the lead Cygnian stepped onto the designated pressure plate, two things happened at once. The thermal lance on the conduit flared for a fraction of a second. A silent, intensely bright spark. The superheated joint burst, releasing a jet of high-pressure, corrosive steam directly onto the patrol. The lead hoplite's armor, designed to withstand plasma fire and kinetic impacts, hissed and buckled as the steam found the seams, flash boiling the biomechanical fluid within. Simultaneously, the maintenance crane above whirred to life. Its grapple, no longer constrained by safety protocols, didn't lower, it simply released. A 2-ton block of unrefined ore, held in its grip for a diagnostic check, dropped from a height of 30 meters. It didn't just hit the patrol, it obliterated them, turning the perfectly synchronized warriors into a mangled heap of shattered metal and steaming organic fluid. The sound, a deafening clang of impact and the shriek of tortured metal, was catastrophic. For a moment, the entire sector of the forge fell silent, the rhythmic pounding of the machinery faltering as automated systems tried to process the unexpected, illogical event. Anya and Vance were already moving. They slipped past the wreckage and the chaos, using the momentary confusion as a shield. Alarms began to blare, but they were general, undirected, reporting an industrial accident, not an attack. No one was looking for infiltrators. They were looking for a systems failure. Deeper they went, into the bowels of the machine. They traversed catwalks that stretched across chasms so deep the bottom was lost in darkness, the air filled with the acrid tang of chemical reagents. They hid in the shadows of colossal robotic arms that assembled the bodies of Cygnian warriors with terrifying precision, the air crackling with the energy of plasma welders. This was a world built by and for machines, a place of cold, hard angles, and unforgiving logic. It was a place where messy, unpredictable things like hope and fear had no meaning. It was a place designed to be unassailable. Hours later, they found themselves in a section that wasn't on any of the schematics Anya had managed to acquire. It was a quieter place, the roar of the forges replaced by a low, electrical hum and the faint, unsettling sound of pained whimpering. The corridor opened into a vast, cavernous chamber lined with glowing stasis pods. Inside each pod was a creature, a specimen from one of the countless worlds the Ascendancy had conquered, a lithe, furred Xylotian, a silicon-based creature from the Zuran fleets, even a hulking, four-armed warrior that Vance identified as a Creel, a species thought to be extinct for 100 cycles. This was not a prison, it was a laboratory. Wires and nutrient tubes snaked into their bodies, and their pained eyes tracked the duo's movement. This was the source of the Cygnians' biomechanical perfection, 1,000 species, strip-mined for their most useful biological traits: strength, speed, resilience, psionic ability, and woven into their mechanical soldiers. A side door hissed open, and a Cygnian technician, its movements less rigid and more fluid than the warriors, entered the chamber. It paid them no mind. Its attention focused on a console, its spindly fingers dancing across the interface. It was oblivious, lost in its work. Vance looked at Anya, his expression unreadable. But his hand tightened on his weapon. The mission was clear: no witnesses, no distractions. The captives were a liability. Freeing them would create a chaotic diversion, but it would also announce their presence in a way that couldn't be mistaken for an accident. Leaving them was the logical, tactical choice. But as Anya looked into the eyes of a captured Varen, a creature known for its telepathic songs, she saw not just pain, but a flicker of intelligent awareness. It knew what she was. It knew she was a choice, a possibility in a place that had none. She remembered the faces in the Martian refugee camps, the hollowed-out look of people who had been reduced to raw material for someone else's ambition. Vance's voice was a ghost in her ear. "They're already dead. Anya, we move on." She looked from the helpless Varen to the preoccupied technician, then to the main exit on the far side of the chamber. There was a third option. Not rescue, not abandonment, sabotage. She raised her datapad versus its screen casting a faint blue light on her determined face. She couldn't save them, but she could give them a fighting chance. And in doing so, create a far more meaningful diversion than any simple explosion. With deft fingers, she began to write a new line of code, not for a machine, but for the life support systems of the stasis pods. A simple command unlock, all of them, simultaneously. She found the chamber's primary control node, a network hub blinking with countless status lights. This was the brainstem of the laboratory. Her virus wasn't designed for this system, but the core principles were the same. Find the master command, bypass the security handshakes, and introduce a single, catastrophic instruction. The technician was still engrossed in its work, splicing some new genetic horror into the Signian template. Vance stood guard, a silent gray statue, ready to kill it in a heartbeat if it so much as turned its head. Anya worked quickly, her mind a whirlwind of code and consequence. This was a terrible risk. It was loud, messy, and unpredictable. It was everything their mission wasn't supposed to be. But looking at the rows of caged life forms, she knew it was the only choice she could make. It was the human choice. She located the emergency release protocol for the stasis pods, a command buried under layers of security meant to prevent a catastrophic containment breach. She bypassed the first layer, then the second. A third, more complex encryption wall appeared. It was bio-keyed to the prefect class. She couldn't break it, not in time, but she could fool it. She accessed the lab's short-term sensor logs, found the biosignature of the prefect from the assembly floor, and copied it. With trembling fingers, she fed the stolen signature into the system as her authentication key. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then a single green light blinked on her screen. Access granted. She typed the final command and hit enter. The effect was instantaneous and terrifying. A single, piercing alarm shrieked through the chamber, and every one of the hundreds of stasis pods hissed open. For a moment, there was only a stunned silence. Then chaos erupted. The freed creatures, delirious with sudden freedom and pain, began to stir. The technician spun around, its placid demeanor shattering as it saw what was happening. It raised a hand to its comlink, but before it could utter a word, Vance was on it, a blur of motion. There was a single, sickening crunch of metal and bone, and the technician crumpled to the floor. The creatures were awake now, their cries and roars filling the air. A massive creel tore the nutrient tubes from its body and shattered its glass prison with a single, thunderous blow. The Xylosians, moving with blinding speed, swarmed the consoles, tearing them apart with feral rage. Anya and Vance didn't wait to watch the outcome. They sprinted for the far exit as the lab descended into a bloodbath, the sounds of alien roars and shattering equipment echoing behind them. They had reached the base of the first major security checkpoint leading to the Nexus Spire, a massive blast door guarded by automated plasma turrets and a full garrison of hoplites now scrambling to respond to the containment breach in the labs. The distraction was working. The entire level was in chaos. Signian forces being diverted to deal with the rampaging prisoners. But as the blast door in front of them began to cycle open, revealing the phalanx of guards waiting beyond, Anya knew their quiet infiltration was over. The symphony of the Forge was broken, And now, the real noise was about to begin. The blast door didn't slide open. It irised, its segmented plates retracting into the walls with a pneumatic hiss that was swallowed by the sudden, deafening shriek of targeting alarms. Beyond the threshold, a sterile, white corridor stretched into the distance, a stark contrast to the grimy underbelly they had just traversed. This was the Cygnian ideal of warfare: clean, orderly, and absolute. At least 20 hoplites stood in a perfect checkerboard formation, their plasma rifles already raised and glowing with nascent energy. Floating above them, mounted on articulated arms from the ceiling, were 4 plasma turrets, their multi-lensed optical sensors swiveling in unison to lock on to Anya and Vance. There was no cover, no exit, only a perfectly designed kill box. Vance didn't hesitate. He shoved Anya behind him, his body a bulwark of scarred muscle and hardened armor, and unslung his pulse rifle in a single beat. Fluid motion. "Buy me a second," was all he said, the words a flat, calm statement of fact. He opened fire not at the hoplites, but at the ceiling just in front of them. The pulse rounds, designed to shred armor, instead chewed through the polished composite of the corridor's ceiling, raining down a shower of debris and dust. It was a pathetic shield, but it was enough to momentarily obscure the turret's perfect targeting solution. That second was all Anya needed. She slammed her datapad against the door's control panel, not bothering with the delicate work of finding a port. She activated her wrist-mounted induction linker, forcing a direct and brutal data dump into the system. Her mind raced, filtering through the layers of Cygnian security. She couldn't shut the turrets down. Their power systems were isolated, but their targeting software, the IFF protocols that prevented them from firing on other Cygnian units, was networked. It had to be, for efficiency, and anything networked was a vulnerability. The first volley of plasma fire sizzled past Vance's head, scoring a molten channel into the wall behind them. He grunted, firing back in controlled bursts, forcing 2 hoplites to break formation as their shields flared and failed. He was a master of suppression, not trying to win, just trying not to lose too quickly. On Anya's screen, lines of Cygnian code scrolled past at an impossible speed. She found it a small, elegant string of code that defined ally. It was cross-referenced against the unique energy signature of every Cygnian weapon and life sign on the level. She didn't try to delete it. She simply added a new definition. With a few frantic keystrokes, she designated the energy signature of the hoplites' plasma rifles as hostile. The change was instantaneous. The 4 plasma turrets, obeying their new, corrupted logic with perfect machine obedience, swiveled their barrels down. The hoplites in the corridor had a single moment of electronic confusion as their tactical displays suddenly flagged the automated defenses above them as enemy targets. Before any of them could process this impossible contradiction, the turrets opened fire. The corridor became a blender of white-hot energy and shrieking metal. The Cygnians, caught between Vance's fire from the front and their own defenses from above, were annihilated in seconds. Their rigid formation, their greatest strength, became their coffin as they were systematically scythed down by the weapons meant to protect them. The slaughter was chillingly efficient. Vance lowered his rifle, the barrel smoking, and looked back at Anya. "Next time," he said, his voice as even as ever, a little more warning. Anya leaned against the doorframe, her breath coming in ragged gasps, the adrenaline leaving a metallic taste in her mouth. Warning is a luxury. "Elias," she managed. "Let's move before the system corrects." The system was already correcting. In the Nexus Spire, a place of silent, Cold data streams and serene operational oversight. Prefect Valerius watched the tactical replay with an emotion that bordered on revulsion. The industrial accident in the biolabs, the containment breach, these were explainable, if irritating. Failures of hardware. This, however, was a violation. The elegant logic of his defense grid had been twisted into a self-consuming serpent. The primitives hadn't overpowered his system. They had poisoned it. They had used its own perfection against it. It was, to his sensibilities, a form of blasphemy. Seal all transit corridors in sectors Gamma 9 through Theta 4, he commanded, his voice resonating through the pristine command center. Divert all atmospheric processing to emergency purge cycle. I want the air in those sectors to become unbreathable, even with their rebreathers. Flood the lower levels with coolant. Reroute primary power conduits to create lethal energy fields in all non-essential maintenance shafts. They used my machine to create chaos. Now, I will turn the entire forge into a single, thinking weapon. A weapon designed to crush them. He brought up a schematic of the forge, his spindly metallic fingers tracing the infiltrator's likely path. They were moving upwards, towards him, towards the spire. It was logical. It was predictable. And he would be waiting. Anya and Vance moved through the carnage, the acrid smell of burnt metal and vaporized biofluid stinging Anya's nostrils. They were ascending now, climbing through the skeletal superstructure of the forge. They left the assembly floors and labs behind, entering a new stratum of the world machine, the great recycling and waste reclamation levels. Here, the world was a vision of industrial hellscape. Colossal grinders, kilometers wide, chewed on the wreckage of failed prototypes and battlefield scrap, their diamond-hard teeth screaming as they pulverized metal into dust. Rivers of corrosive slurry flowed in open channels, bubbling with noxious fumes. Conveyor belts the size of highways transported mountains of debris, including the mangled remains of Cygnian warriors, their forms indistinguishable from any other piece of scrap. There was a grim efficiency to it all. Nothing was wasted, not even their own dead. They were just more raw material to be fed back into the crucible. Their new path was a narrow service catwalk suspended over a grinder pit so vast it seemed to have its own weather system. The noise was a physical force, a constant, bone-jarring roar that made communication impossible except through their helmet comms. The schematics show a primary power conduit on the far side of this level. Anya shouted over the din, her voice tinny in Vance's ear. If we can get to it, it should provide a direct route up to the lower spire distribution nodes. Vance didn't reply. His head was on a swivel, his eyes scanning the labyrinth of moving machinery around them. This place felt wrong. It was too open, too linear. After the kill box at the blast door, this straightforward path felt like a gift, and Vance had learned long ago that the universe did not give gifts, especially not in wartime. He remembered the siege of New Damascus, being funneled through a seemingly clear avenue by separatist forces, only for the buildings on both sides to reveal themselves as nests of heavy machine guns. He had lost his entire platoon in under a minute. The memory was a cold knot in his gut, a visceral instinct that screamed, "Trap!" "Hold!" he said suddenly, grabbing Anya's arm. She stopped, looking at him with a questioning glance. He pointed to a section of the catwalk 50 meters ahead. "The metal is different," he said, his voice low. "See the sheen? It's newer, less corroded." Anya zoomed in with her visor's optical sensor. He was right. A 20-meter section of the gantry was subtly cleaner, the wear and tear of centuries of industrial exposure conspicuously absent. It was a patch job, a replacement. Her own scanners had registered it as structurally sound. Nothing more. But Vance saw the world in a different language, a language of scars and traps and things that were out of place. While her mind worked on the level of systems and data, his operated on the primal level of predator and prey. She quickly ran a deeper scan, cross-referencing the material composition with the Forge's maintenance logs. A red flag popped up on her display. The section had been replaced only 3 hours ago. An emergency work order, citing structural fatigue. It was a lie. It's a pressure plate. She breathed. The whole section is rigged. Weight sensors. They're not trying to blow the bridge. They're trying to pinpoint our exact location. They were being herded. Valerius wasn't just throwing guards at them. He was playing a more patient, more insidious game. "We go around," Vance stated, already turning to look for another route. But as he turned, a new sound cut through the roar of the grinders, a high-pitched, whining hum. From the shadows of the surrounding machinery, new figures emerged. They were not hoplites. These were leaner, faster, their forms stripped of all non-essential armor plating, their limbs ending not in hands, but in long, monomolecular blades that vibrated with a deadly energy. Praetorians, hunter-killer units designed for infiltration and assassination. They moved with a predatory grace that was utterly alien to the rigid movements of the standard Cygnian soldier. There were 6 of them, and they were fanning out, boxing Anya and Vance in on the narrow catwalk. The trap hadn't been the pressure plate. The pressure plate had been the bait. The trap was the Praetorians, and it had just sprung. "So much for the direct route," Anya muttered, drawing her sidearm, a compact plasma pistol that felt like a child's toy in the face of the encroaching death machines. Vance didn't say a word. He ripped a 2-meter-long sheet of metal from a damaged section of the catwalk's guardrail, the metal groaning in protest. He held it in front of him like a makeshift shield, its jagged edges making it as much a weapon as a defense. "Stay behind me," he ordered. His eyes locked on the advancing Praetorians. "When I make an opening, you run." The Praetorians attacked not as a group, but as a coordinated pack. 2 rushed forward, their blades a silver blur, while the other 4 flanked, leaping with impossible agility onto the surrounding pipes and girders, seeking a higher angle of attack. Vance met the first charge with a roar. He didn't block the shimmering blade. He deflected it, using the flat of his metal sheet to send the Praetorian staggering sideways. He followed the move with a brutal kick to the machine's torso, sending it stumbling back into its partner. The other Praetorians opened fire, not with plasma, but with streams of tiny, razor-sharp flechettes that pattered against Vance's makeshift shield like deadly rain. Anya, huddled behind him, aimed her pistol at one of the flanking units and fired. The shot went wide, ricocheting off a steel beam. This was not her world. She was a ghost, a hacker, not a soldier. Her battlefield was one of data and logic, not kinetic violence. But she fired again and again, forcing the Praetorian to duck behind cover, buying Vance another precious second. Vance was a whirlwind of brutal efficiency. He fought like a cornered animal, using his size, his strength, and the environment itself as weapons. He slammed his shield into one Praetorian, crushing its optical sensor, then swung the jagged edge of the metal sheet around in a vicious arc, cleaving through the arm of another. But they were too fast, too numerous. One of them dropped from a pipe above, its blade descending in a silent, lethal arc aimed at Vance's exposed back. Before Anya could even shout a warning, Vance spun, catching the blade on his shield with a deafening shriek of metal on metal. The impact threw him back a step, his boots scraping on the gantry. He was powerful, but he was tiring. They couldn't win this fight. They couldn't run. The catwalk was a dead end. Anya's eyes darted around, her mind desperately searching for a third option, an escape route that wasn't on any map. Her gaze fell on the massive conveyor belt rumbling along 20 meters below their catwalk, a river of scrap metal and industrial refuse heading towards the gaping maw of a grinder pit in the distance. It was suicide, but it was better than the certain death that awaited them here. Elias, she screamed over the sounds of combat. The belt. We have to jump. He glanced down, his face grim. He understood immediately. He shoved another attacker away, creating a momentary pocket of space. On my mark, he yelled. He took a deep breath, planted his feet, and with a final, desperate roar, he charged forward, directly at the two Praetorians blocking their path. He slammed into them with the force of a freight train, his body and his shield a battering ram of pure kinetic fury. The two machines, not expecting the suicidal rush, were thrown off balance, their disciplined coordination shattered for a single, critical instant. Now he bellowed. Anya didn't need to be told twice. She sprinted past the melee, her heart pounding in her chest, and took a flying leap off the edge of the catwalk. For a terrifying second, she was airborne, the roar of the grinder filling her ears, the vast chasm of the pit yawning below her. She hit the conveyor belt hard, tumbling head over heels amidst a mountain of sharp, twisted metal. A moment later, Vance landed beside her with a ground-shaking thud, his makeshift shield clattering onto the belt. He was already back on his feet, pulling her up as the Praetorians gathered at the edge of the catwalk above, their glowing blades casting long, menacing shadows over them. They were safe, for the moment. But they were now on a one-way trip, being carried at an alarming speed directly towards the colossal, grinding teeth of the reclamation pit. As they scrambled to find their footing on the unstable river of scrap, a voice, calm and impossibly clear, echoed in their helmets, overriding their secure channel. It was not a broadcast. It was directed specifically at them. "Primitive creatures," the voice said, laced with a cold, intellectual curiosity. It was Prefect Valerius. "Your tactics are fascinating. So illogical. So beautifully chaotic. But your journey ends here. You chose to flee into the belly of the beast. A fitting metaphor. Allow me to accelerate the digestive process." Far ahead of them, the rhythmic, grinding motion of the colossal machine began to speed up, the roar intensifying as the teeth spun faster and faster. They were on a speeding train to their own annihilation. The hunter was no longer just watching. He was talking to them, savoring the kill. They had escaped the pack of wolves only to find themselves trapped in the jaws of the dragon. The conveyor belt bucked and shuddered beneath them, its increased velocity turning the river of scrap into a treacherous, churning rapids of jagged metal. The roar of the grinder ahead was no longer a background noise. It was a physical presence, a monstrous, hungry vibration that resonated in their bones and threatened to shake their teeth loose. Anya risked a glance back. The Praetorians were gone from the catwalk above, but she knew they weren't giving up. They would be racing along parallel gantries, flanking them, ensuring there was no escape from this industrial gullet. Prefect Valerius's voice, a silken thread of condescending amusement in their ears, was the most unnerving part. He wasn't just trying to kill them, he was dissecting them, studying their desperation as a scientist would a microbe in a petri dish. "Your species' most defining trait appears to be a misplaced faith in improvisation," Valerius mused, his voice a calm counterpoint to the chaos. "You leap without knowing where you will land. A fascinating, if terminally flawed, survival strategy. Vance ignored the voice, his focus absolute. He scanned the torrent of debris, his eyes picking out a large, relatively flat piece of hull plating from a wrecked Cygnian dropship. There, he grunted, pointing. Get on it. It'll be more stable than this loose scrap. Together, they scrambled across the shifting metal, half climbing, half surfing the wave of refuse until they reached the makeshift raft. It was barely 5 meters long, but it provided a semblance of solid ground in the churning chaos. They were still hurtling towards oblivion, but now at least they were doing it together on a single piece of junk. Anya's mind, however, was not on their immediate survival. It was on the voice. Valerius had overridden their secure military-grade comms channel. To do that, he had to have established a direct data link to their helmets. It was an act of supreme arrogance, a way to gloat, to witness their fear up close. And it was a mistake. An open channel was a two-way street. "Keep him talking," she said to Vance, her voice low and urgent. She dropped to one knee on the hull plate, her back to the roaring grinder, and pulled out her data pad. Its screen was a spiderweb of cracks from the landing, but it flickered to life. "I need to get a trace on his signal, find his physical location." Vance understood. He stood over her, his body a shield against the worst of the jostling, and keyed his own calm. "You talk a lot for a machine," he said, his voice a low growl of defiance. "Hiding in your clean room, watching the little creatures scurry through your pipes. Why don't you come down here and face us yourself?" There was a moment of silence, and Anya imagined Valerius tilting his head, processing the primitive challenge. Physical confrontation is a crude and inefficient tool. "Soldier," the prefect replied, a hint of disdain in his tone. "It is a sign of evolutionary immaturity. I defeat you not with brute force, but with superior logic. For instance, the logic that dictates that your current trajectory is inescapable." On Anya's screen, a flurry of data appeared. The signal was strong, heavily encrypted and routed through a dozen ghost relays to mask its origin. But the very strength of the signal was a clue. To maintain such a clear, real-time connection in the storm of electromagnetic interference, Valerius had to be close. He wasn't in some distant command center on the other side of the planet. He was here. He was watching. She began to peel back the layers of the encryption, her fingers flying across the cracked screen. It was like peeling an onion made of diamonds, each layer harder than the last. She needed more time. "You call this logic?" Vance shot back, kicking a piece of sharp metal away from their raft, dropping us into a trash compactor. "My people have been doing that to each other for 1,000 years. It's not logic. It's pest control. It's what you do when you're afraid. Fear." Valerius's voice was laced with clinical curiosity. "Is a chemical reaction a flawed response to a perceived threat? I perceive no threat. I perceive only a problem and its imminent solution." As he spoke, a new danger emerged. Ahead and to their left, a massive, articulated claw descended from the ceiling, part of the automated sorting system. It wasn't trying to grab them. It was aiming for a colossal engine block just ahead of their position on the belt. If it picked it up, it would create a tidal wave of metal that would swamp their raft and bury them alive. Vance saw it instantly. He grabbed the jagged piece of guardrail he had carried with them from the catwalk, the only weapon he had left. It was heavy, unwieldy, but it was solid steel. As the claw descended, he braced himself, took aim, and with a guttural roar, he threw it. The spinning projectile, end over end, soared through the air and slammed directly into the primary hydraulic joint of the claw's pincers. The impact was spectacular. Sparks flew, and with a high-pitched scream of tortured metal, the joint seized. The claw, its command to close now impossible to execute, froze in place, its open pincers just meters above the engine block. They shot past it, safe by a hair's breadth. Anya didn't even look up. She was deep inside the prefect's network now, following the digital breadcrumbs of his signal. She bypassed a final firewall, and then she saw it. A schematic appeared on her screen, a blueprint of the reclamation level. A single, blinking red light pulsed on the diagram. An observation chamber, shielded and reinforced, built into the wall of the grinder pit itself, with a panoramic view of the entire floor. He was less than 500 meters away. "Got him," she whispered, the word a prayer of victory. She looked up from her screen, her eyes adjusting to the horrifying reality of their situation. The maw of the grinder was terrifyingly close now, a spinning vortex of blades and hammers that filled their entire field of vision. The sound was a physical wall of noise that made thought itself seem impossible. They had maybe 30 seconds left, but 30 seconds was all she needed. She didn't have a weapon that could breach the observation chamber from here, but Valerius had already told her the answer. He controlled the forge. He was using the machine to kill them. It was time to return the favor. Her fingers became a blur. She found the control systems for the reclamation level, the same ones Valerius was using to speed up the conveyor. But she didn't try to slow it down. She did the opposite. She found the command for the magnetic sorters, powerful electromagnets used to separate ferrous from non-ferrous metals on the belt. They were, by default, inactive in their current sector to prevent interference with the claw systems. With a few keystrokes, she overrode the safety protocols and activated the primary magnet on their left, the one closest to Valerius's hidden perch. She didn't just turn it on. She pushed it to 150% of its operational capacity. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The entire river of metal on their left side of the belt suddenly lurched sideways, drawn by an irresistible force. A tsunami of scrap, tons of it, rose up and slammed against the reinforced wall of the grinder pit. Their own raft of hull plating, being non-ferrous, was unaffected, but they were nearly swamped by the wake. In the observation chamber, a shower of sparks rained down from the ceiling as the overloaded magnet blew every circuit breaker on the level. A hairline crack appeared in the armored plasteel window as a 10-ton girder, lifted by the magnetic field, slammed into it like a battering ram. For the first time, Prefect Valerius experienced an emotion that his processors struggled to categorize surprise. His connection to Anya and Vance's comms sputtered and died. The lights in his chamber flickered, and a klaxon, a sound he had only ever heard in simulations, began to blare. The primitives had attacked the chamber itself. Impossible. On the belt, Anya wasn't finished. The grinder was still pulling them in, its speed unabated. She looked at the schematic again. The observation chamber had its own isolated power source, but it also had a waste disposal chute, a small secondary conveyor designed for incinerating sensitive documents or failed experiments. It fed directly into the main grinder pit, just above the primary blades. It was their only way out. "Elias," she yelled, pointing at a spot on the wall, now visible through the chaos. "There. That chute. It's our exit." Vance saw it. A small, square opening about a meter wide, 20 meters up the sheer wall. It might as well have been on the moon. How he shouted back, the hope in her voice sounding like madness. "We'll make a ramp," she said, her eyes wild with the desperate, brilliant insanity of the plan. She turned back to her datapad, her mind already working on the next piece of the puzzle. She still had control of the magnetic sorters, She targeted another one, this one directly in front of them, on the right side of the belt. She activated it, again at maximum power. A mountain of scrap metal began to pile up in front of them, diverting the flow of the conveyor, creating a massive, unstable pile that grew higher and higher with each passing second. It was a dam of junk, and it was building itself into a ramp, leading directly towards the chute, their own small raft, caught in the altered current, began to ride up the face of the growing pile. It was a chaotic, bucking ride, the plate groaning and threatening to break apart under the strain. But it was working. They were rising, climbing the wall of scrap, the small as a dark opening of the chute getting closer and closer. Below them, the main flow of the conveyor, now unimpeded, poured into the grinder with a deafening, final roar. They had seconds before their makeshift ramp collapsed and followed suit. They reached the apex. The chute was right there, a dark promise of safety. "Go!" Vance yelled, giving Anya a powerful shove that sent her scrambling into the opening. He followed a moment later, pulling himself in just as their hull plate raft, its purpose served, finally gave way and tumbled back into the abyss, consumed by the grinder's insatiable teeth. They collapsed in the narrow, dark chute, the metallic tube barely wide enough for them to lie side by side. The roar of the grinder faded, replaced by the hiss of the chute's internal mechanisms and the frantic pounding of their own hearts. They were alive. They were filthy, bruised, and exhausted. But they were alive. And more importantly, they were inside the walls. The chute carried them on a short, rattling journey before depositing them unceremoniously onto the cold, metal floor of a small, dark room. The air was still and silent. A single red light pulsed on a control panel, indicating a system malfunction. It was an incinerator room, the final destination for the prefect's trash. A heavy, insulated door stood on the far side of the room. Vance got to his feet and tried the handle. It was locked, electronically. Anya pushed herself up, her body aching, and moved to the control panel next to the door. "Let me guess," Vance said dryly. "It's locked from the other side." Anya smiled, a grim, tired expression. "They always are," she said. She pulled out her data pad. The screen was now completely shattered, but the induction linker on her wrist was still functional. She pressed it against the panel. This lock was simpler, a standard internal security door. A few seconds later, there was a click, and the door hissed open. Beyond it lay a polished, silent, white corridor, the same kind of corridor they had seen before the kill box. They had bypassed the main security of the entire level. They were now inside Prefect Valerius's personal domain. They stepped out into the hallway, weapons ready. The pristine silence was more unnerving than the roar of the forge had been. Every footstep echoed. There were no guards, no turrets, just long, empty corridors bathed in cold, sterile light. "He knows we're here," Vance said, his voice a low whisper. "He's waiting for us." Anya nodded, her eyes scanning the ceiling, the walls, looking for any sign of a trap. "This is his ground now," she said. "He thinks he's lured us into his web." They advanced cautiously down the corridor, which opened into a large, circular chamber. In the center of the chamber was a raised platform, and on it, bathed in a soft, blue light, stood a single figure. It was Prefect Valerius. He was taller than the standard hoplite, his form more elegant, almost skeletal. His armor was the color of polished obsidian, and his head was a smooth, featureless ovoid, save for a single glowing blue optic in the center. He held no weapon. He simply stood there, watching them, his posture one of perfect, analytical calm. "Welcome!" His voice echoed in the chamber. The same calm, condescending voice from the comms. "I must confess, I underestimated you. Your capacity for generating chaos is remarkable. You have successfully navigated the digestive tract of the forge, but now you have arrived at the brain. And here, the rules are mine." The floor around his platform began to glow, and lines of blue light traced complex geometric patterns across the chamber. Panels in the walls slid open, revealing not weapons, but sophisticated sensor arrays and emitter nodes. The entire room was a single Bivouac integrated weapon system, controlled directly by the prefect's will. They had not entered his web. They had entered his mind. The chamber was a sterile, holographic hell. The blue light intensified, not just illuminating the space, but seemingly giving it substance, turning the air thick and heavy. The geometric patterns on the floor pulsed in time with a low, sub-audible hum that vibrated deep in Anya's bones. This wasn't a room, it was a processor, an external manifestation of Valerius's consciousness. He hadn't built a fortress, he had built an arena where the laws of physics were subject to his own flawless logic. "You fight with tools. Primitives." Valerius's voice resonated from all around them. No longer a broadcast, but an environmental property, like the air itself. Guns, explosives, crude data viruses. You see the machine as something to be broken. I am the machine. You cannot break me. You can only be deleted. Vance raised his pulse rifle, but he didn't fire. There was nothing to shoot at but the prefect himself, and he knew a direct assault would be useless. This was Anya's battlefield now, a war of logic and will, and he was just a piece on the board. Anya's eyes darted around the room, ignoring the prefect's theatrical posturing. She wasn't looking at the glowing lights or the emitter nodes as weapons, but as peripherals, input-output devices for a central server. And that server was Valerius himself. His arrogance was his flaw. By integrating himself so completely with the room, he had turned himself into a network hub, a hub she could access. She took a step forward, her expression a mask of calm defiance. "You're right," she said, her voice clear and steady. "We do break things. It's what we're good at. We broke out of our cradle, broke the atom, broke the tyranny of distance. We're a species of breakers. You, on the other hand, you've spent 10,000 years perfecting a system. You've forgotten how to adapt to something you can't predict." She activated her induction linker, not aiming it at a panel, but holding it out like a divining rod, sweeping it through the air. Her data pad was useless, but the linker on her wrist was a direct interface. She was looking for a signal, a carrier wave, the frequency on which Valerius was projecting his control. Valerius tilted his head, the single blue optic narrowing slightly. A pointless gesture. "There is no wireless signal to intercept. My control is optical, hard light, instantaneous." As he spoke, a section of the floor in front of Anya dissolved, not into a pit, but into a swirling vortex of shimmering blue pixels. A deletion protocol. One more step and her foot would cease to exist. Vance pulled her back just as the vortex stabilized. A perfect silent hole in reality. Anya didn't flinch. He was telling the truth. No wireless. Which meant his control had to be line of sight, transmitted via the very light that filled the room. The emitters in the walls weren't just for show. They were his nervous system. "Optical," she murmured to Vance. A plan beginning to form. A desperate, insane gambit. He's running the whole room on a light-based data network. If we can disrupt the light, we can disrupt his control. Vance looked around at the brilliantly lit chamber. Disrupt the light, Anya. The entire room is a light bulb. What are we going to throw at it? A rock. Something better, she said, her eyes gleaming with a feverish intensity. She unsealed a small pouch on her belt, one she hadn't touched the entire mission. Inside were 3 small, gray spheres, each no bigger than a marble. They were EMP grenades, but of a specialized, almost forbidden, variety. Standard EMPs were designed to fry electronics with a radio wave burst. These were different. They were photon overload devices, nicknamed sunspots. When detonated, they didn't release a radio wave. They released a single, nanosecond-long burst of pure, chaotic, multi-spectrum light. An incandescent flash so intense it could permanently damage optical sensors and overwhelm any light-based data system. They were designed for blinding enemy fleets, not for use inside a sealed room. Initiating one in here would be like setting off a flashbang inside your own eyeball. They would be just as blind as Valerius. You're crazy, Vance breathed, realizing what she was planning. We'll be completely exposed, blind and helpless. He already thinks we're helpless, Anya countered, her voice tight with urgency. He's toying with us, testing us. He expects us to run, to hide, and to fight his holograms. He doesn't expect us to burn the whole world down just to get one shot at him. She looked at Vance, her gaze unwavering. I can get a lock on his core frequency, but I need a few seconds of total system chaos. I need you to get me to that platform. Can you do it blind? Vance's face was a grim mask, but a slow, feral smile touched his lips. It was the smile of a man who had faced impossible odds his entire life and had somehow, impossibly, survived. The unification wars hadn't been fought in pristine, logical arenas. They had been fought in the dark, in the rubble, with broken knives and bare hands. Blindness was a tactical advantage if your enemy had forgotten how to fight without their eyes. Just tell me when, was all he said. Valerius watched their silent exchange, his processors analyzing their micro-expressions, their posture. He registered a shift in their strategy, but the data was inconclusive. Their behavior was deviating from all established models of Terran combat doctrine. They were not panicking. They were preparing. Your silence is telling. The prefect's voice echoed. Have you finally accepted the futility of your position? This time, Anya was the one who smiled. We're not accepting anything. We're just rebooting. With that, she threw the first sunspot. It didn't fly towards Valerius, but straight up, toward the center of the ceiling. As it reached its apex, she screamed, Now! Elias, close your eyes. She squeezed her own eyes shut a split second before the grenade detonated. The world went white, even through her eyelids. The light was a physical blow, a searing, absolute whiteness that overloaded every nerve in her optic system. The subaudible hum of the chamber spiked into a deafening shriek of static. And then, silence. The light that was Valerius's nervous system, his weapon, his very consciousness, was gone, drowned in a tidal wave of pure chaotic energy. For a precious few seconds, the prefect was blind, deaf, and utterly alone inside his own mind. When Anya opened her eyes, the world was a swimming, disorienting mess of phantom spots and lingering retinal burns. The chamber was plunged into a deep, oppressive darkness, lit only by the faint, emergency red lighting of the forge beyond the open doorway. The glowing blue lines were gone. The emitter nodes were dark. The holographic floor was just a solid metal plate once more. The system was down, And Vance was already moving. He was a phantom in the gloom, not running, but stalking forward with a predator's certainty. His pulse rifle was slung on his back. It was useless in this darkness. In his hands, he held the jagged shard of metal he had somehow retrieved from the incinerator room. A primitive, brutal spear. He wasn't aiming for where Valerius had been, but for where he had to be, his ears tracking the faint, almost imperceptible hum of the prefect's internal power systems. From the central platform came a sound of pure electronic confusion, a discordant screech of glitched vocalizers as Valerius tried to reboot his connection to the room. His single blue optic soul, now flickering erratically, was the only point of light in the center of the chamber. It was a beacon, and Vance was closing on it like a heat-seeking missile. Anya scrambled to her feet, her own vision slowly clearing. She held the induction linker out, and this time, she got a signal. With his external systems down, Valerius's core programming was screaming, sending out frantic, unencrypted diagnostic queries. It was a raw, naked data stream, and it was pouring right into her linker. Lines of code, the very essence of the prefect's being, scrolled across the inside of her visor. She saw his control protocols for the Forge, his command authority over the Cygnian legions, his access to 10,000 years of tactical data, and buried deep within it all, she saw his failsafe, a self-destruct sequence for the entire Forge, a scorched earth protocol to be initiated in the event of an irreversible system compromise. It was his final, logical move. If he was to be deleted, he would take the entire planet with him. She didn't have time to hack it, to disable it, but she could copy it. With frantic concentration, she isolated the command string and began downloading it. It was a massive file, a cascade of encrypted triggers and authorizations. It would take time she didn't have. On the platform, Vance engaged the prefect. The fight was nothing like the graceful, deadly ballet of the Praetorians. This was a brutal, ugly brawl in the dark. Valerius, stripped of his holographic weapons, was still a formidable opponent. His lean, metallic frame was impossibly strong, his movements jarringly fast. He met Vance's charge with a sweeping blow from his arm, which ended in a set of long, knife-like fingers. Vance parried with his metal shard, the sound of scraping metal echoing in the silent room. "Intruder system compromised!" Valerius shrieked, his voice no longer calm and condescending, but a glitched, mechanical roar of pure rage. Deletion imminent. He fought with the desperate, illogical fury of a god who had just been made mortal. Anya threw the second sunspot. It rolled across the floor and detonated at the base of the platform. The world went white again. Vance, expecting it this time, had already ducked and shielded his face. Valeria, however, took the full force of the blast. His optic sensor exploded in a shower of sparks, and he staggered back, clutching his face, his vocalizers emitting a sound of pure agony. He was completely blind. Vance didn't hesitate. He surged forward under the prefect's flailing arms and drove his metal spear upwards with all his strength. He aimed for the center of the torso, where the primary power conduit should be. The sharpened metal punched through the obsidian armor with a hideous, grinding shriek. Blue energy arced from the wound, crawling over Vance's arms, but he held on, pushing the spear deeper, twisting it. The download complete. The words flashed green on Anya's visor just as Valerius's dying scream echoed through the chamber. The prefect convulsed, a violent, full-body shudder, and then collapsed, his limbs locking in place. The faint hum of his systems died, and the last flicker of light in his shattered optic winked out. Silence returned. Anya sagged against the wall, every muscle in her body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. It was over. They had done it. They had cut the head off the snake. But as she looked at Vance, who stood over the fallen prefect, pulling his crude spear free, she knew it wasn't over. A new light was beginning to fill the room, a soft, pulsing red glow, emanating from the walls, from the floor, from the very air, and a new voice, a calm, female, automated tone, echoed through the chamber. Planetary failsafe protocol initiated. Nexus Spire overload sequence engaged. Detonation in 10 minutes. Valerius was dead, but his final command, his last act of perfect, spiteful logic, was still in motion. They hadn't just killed the warden. They had armed the prison's self-destruct. Anya looked at the data shard in her hand, the one containing her original logic virus, Operation Midas. It seemed like a lifetime ago. That virus was designed to create chaos in the Forge's production systems, to turn their own assembly lines against them. It was a scalpel. The protocol Valerius had just triggered was a sledgehammer. And the command string she had just copied, that was the detonator. Anya. Vance's voice was steady, pulling her from her thoughts. He had walked over to the open doorway. The red emergency lighting of the forge pulsed in time with the countdown. We need to go. Now. Anya looked from the dead prefect to the data shard in her hand, and then to the copied failsafe code displayed on her visor. An idea, more audacious and terrifying than anything she had ever conceived, began to form in her mind. They couldn't stop the self-destruct. But what if they could control it? What if they could change the target? Valerius's final act was meant to deny his enemies their prize. But what if they could turn his ultimate failure into their ultimate weapon? We're not leaving, she said, her voice filled with a terrifying new resolve. We're going up, to the Nexus. The pulsing red light cast the chamber in a hellish, rhythmic glow, turning the dead prefect on the floor into a grotesque silhouette. The automated voice, devoid of malice or triumph, was somehow more terrifying than Valerius's condescending intellect. It was the voice of pure, inescapable consequence. 10 minutes, it repeated. Detonation in 10 minutes. Vance stared at Anya, his face a mask of disbelief under the strobing red light. Up to the Nexus. Are you insane? We just won. We need to find a ship, an escape pod, anything. His pragmatism, the instinct that had kept him alive through a dozen unwinnable wars, was screaming at him. But Anya's eyes held a fire he had never seen before, a terrifying fusion of brilliance and madness. She held up the data shard, its surface seeming to drink in the red light. Winning isn't killing him, Elias. Winning is using what he built to save ourselves. His failsafe isn't just a bomb. It's an overload of the entire planetary power core, an energy source that has supplied their war machine for centuries. If I can get to the primary command spire, I can change the blast parameters. I can turn this entire world from a bomb into a directed energy weapon. Vance's mind struggled to process the sheer audacity of the plan. A weapon aimed at what he asked, though he already knew the answer. The Cygnian fleet. Anya breathed, her voice filled with a chilling reverence for the scale of her own idea. They're sitting in orbit, waiting for Valerius to report our deaths. They're the real threat. We escape now, and they'll just sterilize this world from space and move on. We do this. We end the war in this sector. Today. The countdown ticked to 9 minutes. Every instinct in Vance's body screamed trap, suicide, madness. But he looked at Anya, at the fierce, unwavering conviction in her eyes, and he saw the same desperate, cornered animal logic that had fueled his own survival for decades. It wasn't a plan born of hope. It was a plan forged from the absolute certainty that any other choice was a slower, more meaningless death. He gave a single, sharp nod. "Lead the way," he said, his voice a low rumble of acceptance. "Just get us there fast." They moved, sprinting from the prefect's dead mind and into the dying body of the forge. The pristine corridors of Valerius's domain gave way to the industrial chaos of the upper spire, and the world was tearing itself apart. The rhythmic red pulse of the alarms was their only guide, the automated countdown, their relentless heartbeat. Massive conduits, overloaded with energy, arced and exploded around them, showering the catwalks with incandescent plasma. Entire sections of the flooring gave way, plunging into the darkness below with the groan of tortured metal. This was no longer a structured, logical machine. It was a beast in its death throes, and they were running through its collapsing veins. Vance took the lead, his body a battering ram, shoving aside fallen girders and kicking through jam maintenance hatches. He was in his element, the landscape of pure chaos. His every move a testament to a life spent navigating the anatomy of destruction. Anya followed in his wake, her focus absolute, her mind already at the nexus, wrestling with the code she would need to rewrite. She saw the fail-safe protocol on her visor not as a countdown to death, but as a complex equation she had to solve before time ran out. 6 minutes. The automated voice was their constant companion, a calm reminder of the approaching apocalypse. They reached the base of the final ascent, a vertical maintenance shaft that led directly to the Nexus core. The grav lift was dead, its power cut. The only way up was a service ladder, a thin metal spine disappearing into the darkness 100 meters above. "No time," Vance grunted, looking at the climb. He pointed to a heavy-duty maintenance crane nearby, its grapple arm hanging limp. "Get to the controls, I'll ride the hook." It was a desperate, clumsy solution, but it would be faster than climbing. Anya didn't question it. She scrambled into the crane's operator cabin. The controls dead. She slammed her induction linker against the primary panel, forcing a direct power transfer from her own suit's capacitor. The crane groaned to life, its lights flickering. Outside, Vance had already wrapped a chain from the grapple hook around his waist. "Hit it!" he yelled. Anya slammed the controls forward, and the crane arm swung out over the chasm, then began to ascend with a protesting shriek of overworked motors. Vance dangled precariously, a pendulum of flesh and steel, as chunks of the ceiling rained down around him. 4 minutes! They were halfway up when the crane motor, overloaded and failing, finally caught fire. Sparks turned to flames, and with a final, agonetic groan, the winch seized. Vance was stuck, dangling 30 meters below the Nexus core platform. "Anya, get out of there!" he roared, seeing the flames spread in the cabin. "Go, I'll climb the rest of the way." She ignored him. She could see the core platform now, a circular disk of light in the darkness above. The fail-safe code was scrolling across her vision, and she was already deconstructing it, finding its weak points. She needed to be at that console. She rerouted the last of the crane's failing power, not to the winch, but to the arm's hydraulic extension. With a violent, bone-jarring lurch, the entire crane arm shot upwards, a piston of steel. It wasn't lifting Vance, it was throwing him. He let go of the chain at the apex of the ascent, his body sailing through the air and hitting the platform with a punishing, rolling impact. He was there, Anya watched him get to his feet just as the crane cabin exploded behind her, the force of the blast throwing her from her seat. She scrambled out, climbing the last few meters of the burning, skeletal arm, its metal now glowing red hot. She pulled herself onto the platform, collapsing next to Vance, her lungs burning, her suit singed. 2 minutes. The Nexus Core was a place of serene, terrifying beauty. It was a circular chamber, open to the void of the shaft around them. In the center, a pillar of pure, white light pulsed, the heart of the forge, the source of all its power. A single, crystalline console floated near its edge. This was the altar. As Anya stumbled towards it, the chamber's final defenses activated, not Praetorians or hoplites, but something older, more fundamental. 3 maintenance frames, hulking, multi-limbed automatons, dropped from the ceiling, their limbs reconfiguring from welders and cutters into claws and battering rams. They were the machine's antibodies, its final, mindless attempt to protect its heart. Vance placed himself between them and Anya. He no longer had his spear. He ripped a thick power conduit from the floor, trailing sparks, and held it like a club. "Do what you have to do," he said, his back to her, his eyes on the advancing machines. "I'll buy you the time." Anya didn't look back. She slammed the data shard with Valerius's code into the console. The pillar of light flared, and the entire history and power of the Signian ascendancy flooded her mind. She saw fleets burning, worlds being forged, a civilization built on unwavering, brutal logic. The fail-safe code was a fortress, each line a guard, each subroutine a wall, and Valerius' ghost was in it, a final echo of his will, fighting her, resisting her. She wasn't just hacking a machine. She was wrestling with the soul of a dead god. 60 seconds. Outside, Vance was a storm of violence. He met the first frame's charge with a savage swing of the conduit, crushing its primary optic. The second grabbed him in a pincer-like claw, lifting him off the ground. But he roared, driving his armored boots into its core processor until it sparked and failed, its grip loosening. He was wounded, his armor cracked, but he was a wall of pure, indomitable will. 30 seconds, Anya screamed, pouring every last ounce of her being, her chaotic, human, illogical spirit, into the system. She didn't break the code, she poisoned it. Infected it with the very unpredictability Valerius had despised. She found the core targeting parameters, the elegant physics that defined a perfectly spherical explosion, and she twisted it, corrupted it, gave it a direction. She turned the beautiful, logical suicide into a hateful, focused spear. 10, 9, 8. Vance threw the wreckage of the second frame into the last one, sending them both tumbling over the edge of the platform into the abyss. He turned, blood trickling from his helmet, to see Anya collapse, her hand falling away from the console. "It's done," she whispered. 7, 6. He scooped her up, his powerful arms lifting her as if she weighed nothing. He ran, not for the ladder, but for a small, shielded viewport on the far side of the platform. A thick, plasteel window looking out not into the forge, but into the blackness of space. It was a last resort observation port. 5, 4. He smashed the emergency release with his gauntlet. A heavy blast shield retracted. Beyond it was a small, coffin-sized emergency eject pod, a thing of last resort for the prefect himself. 3. He threw Anya inside and squeezed in after her, the hatch sealing them in darkness. 2. With a violent lurch, the pod fired, shot out from the Nexus spire like a bullet from a gun. 1. They were thrown against their restraints as the pod tumbled into the void, and then, behind them, the universe turned white. There was no sound in the vacuum of space, but Anya felt it, a silent scream of a world being unmade. On their small view screen, they saw the forge world of Xylos not explode, but transform. The planet-spanning machine contracted, pulled in on itself for a fraction of a second, and then erupted, not in a chaotic ball of fire, but in a single, focused, terrifyingly coherent beam of pure, white energy. It was the death cry of a star, weaponized. It lanced out across the blackness and struck the Cygnian Ascendancy fleet, which was holding a serene, confident orbit. Their shields, designed to withstand the crude plasma weapons of other species, flared for a microsecond and then vanished, atomized. The ships themselves, mighty cruisers and destroyers that had terrorized 100 star cycles, simply ceased to be, erased from existence by the final, spiteful gasp of the very world they had built to ensure their dominion. The light faded, leaving only a ghost, an expanding nebula of incandescent dust where a planet and its fleet had been moments before. In the echoing silence of the tiny pod, Anya and Vance floated, two insignificant specks against the backdrop of their impossible victory. They were alone, adrift in a stolen coffin, with no guarantee of rescue. They had won. They had survived. Vance looked at the nebula on the screen, the grave of a world and a civilization, and then he looked at Anya, who was staring at it with hollowed, haunted eyes. "What have we done?" "Anya," he whispered, the question not an accusation, but a quiet, somber request for meaning in the face of such absolute destruction. Anya watched the last embers of their victory fade into the cold darkness of space. "What we had to," she replied, her voice barely a whisper, but as hard and as final as the silence that now surrounded them. "We fought like we had nothing left to lose, and we showed them what it costs to fight a people who have finally learned how to break their own chains."